Pushpin disclaimer: the story is a work of creative nonfiction inspired by emotional storytelling. The events, characters, and dialogues are crafted for narrative effect and audience engagement. While the setting and themes may reflect real-life experiences, the story should not be interpreted as a literal or factual account of any specific person, place, or event. It is written purely for entertainment and emotional reflection, intended for an audience in the United States. For months, I had felt trapped in the endless rhythm of city life. My mornings started with the shrill sound of an alarm clock, followed by a race against time, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, already scrolling through unread emails before I even left my apartment. My days blurred into one another, filled with meetings, deadlines, and the unshakable pressure to always do more, achieve more, be more. At night, I collapsed into bed exhausted, yet unable to sleep, my mind replaying every unfinished task. Slowly, without realizing it, I had stopped living. I was existing, functioning like a machine that never powered down. It was my closest friend who first noticed how burned out I'd become. One evening, as we sat in a crowded diner, she looked at me across the table and said, "You need to get away. Not just a weekend trip, but something real. Somewhere far from all this." At first, I laughed it off. A vacation sounded like a luxury I didn't have time for. But later that night, staring at my reflection in the mirror, hollow eyes, tired skin, a stranger looking back at me, I realized she was right. If I didn't step away soon, I feared I might lose myself completely. I booked the trip on impulse. A small village tucked away in the countryside, far from the noise of skyscrapers and traffic. It wasn't the kind of glamorous vacation people brag about on social media. No fancy hotels, no bustling nightlife, no tourist attractions. Just open fields, family-run farms, and silence. For some reason, that simplicity called out to me more than any five-star getaway ever could. The days leading up to my departure were filled with doubt. Would I regret spending money on this? Would I get bored in a place where nothing happened? But beneath my doubts, there was a quiet spark of excitement, a part of me that longed for something different, something raw and unpolished. By the time my flight was ready for boarding, I had convinced myself this wasn't just a vacation. It was a rescue mission, saving myself from the version of me that was slowly crumbling under the weight of my own expectations. The moment I left the airport and began the drive into the countryside, I felt the shift. Tall glass buildings gave way to wide stretches of farmland. The air looked cleaner somehow, clearer, as if even the sky had been waiting to breathe freely. My phone signal dropped to just 1 bar, and for once, I didn't panic. Instead, I rolled down the window, let the wind tangle through my hair, and inhaled deeply. It smelled different out here: grass, earth, and something faintly sweet that I couldn't yet identify. By the time I arrived at the farmhouse where I'd be staying, the sun was beginning to set. Golden light spilled across the fields, painting everything in shades of orange and pink. I stepped out of the car, stretched my stiff legs, and just stood there for a moment. No honking horns. No rushing crowds. Just crickets, the soft chirp of birds settling for the night, and the faint lowing of cows in the distance. My shoulders, tense for so long, finally began to loosen. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of the best vacation of my life. And soon, something as simple as a glass of fresh milk would change me forever. The farmhouse that greeted me looked like something out of an old painting, its wooden beams weathered yet sturdy, its porch wide and welcoming, with 2 rocking chairs gently creaking in the evening breeze. Flower pots lined the windowsills, filled with bright red geraniums, their petals glowing against the fading light. There was no shiny gate, no polished driveway, just a gravel path leading up to the front steps, where the sound of crunching stones under my shoes felt oddly comforting. It was clear from the very first glance that this was a place built on love, not luxury. Inside, the home smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke. The walls were decorated with family photos, mismatched frames holding snapshots of children laughing, couples holding hands, and generations gathered around long wooden tables. The air was warm, not from air conditioning, but from the natural heat of a kitchen stove that had probably been used for decades. I remember running my hand along the railing of the staircase, smooth from years of touch, and feeling an almost sacred sense of history in every corner. It was the kind of house that made you feel welcome even before anyone spoke a word. But what truly struck me wasn't just the house, it was the silence. Not the empty kind that makes you feel lonely, but the living kind, filled with whispers of nature. From the porch, I could hear the rustle of leaves, the hum of insects, the distant call of a rooster settling in for the night. The quiet wasn't void, it was full, alive, and strangely grounding. For the first time in a long time, I felt my thoughts slow down. I wasn't racing to the next task or worrying about tomorrow. I was simply present. The village itself was no less enchanting. The next morning, as I stepped outside, I saw narrow dirt paths winding between rolling green fields, each one dotted with cows grazing lazily under the wide blue sky. Wooden fences leaned slightly with age, but they carried a certain charm, as if they were storytellers of the years gone by. Children ran barefoot across open meadows, their laughter echoing like music, while elders sat in shaded porches, waving kindly to anyone who passed. There were no cars rushing by, no towering billboards, no screens glowing in windows, just life unfolding in its simplest form. I walked into the small village square later that day, where a handful of shops stood shoulder to shoulder. A bakery with loaves cooling in the window. A general store that seemed to carry everything from seeds to soap. A cafe so tiny it had only 3 tables, each occupied by locals who greeted me with warm, curious smiles. It didn't matter that I was a stranger. Here, everyone acknowledged your existence with kindness, as though being human was reason enough to belong. The beauty of the place wasn't just in its landscape, but in how it made me feel. I wasn't just visiting a village, I was stepping into another rhythm of life, one that pulsed slower, softer, but somehow more real. It was as though time itself stretched wider here, giving me space to breathe, to notice, to exist without demand. For years, I had been chasing the idea of happiness through achievements and possessions. But in that little village, with its cracked fences, barefoot children, and golden fields, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. And though I didn't know it then, this place was about to give me more than peace. It was going to give me family, connection, and a taste of something so simple, yet so profound, it would stay with me for the rest of my life. The door to the farmhouse opened before I had the chance to knock. A woman in her 40s, with flour-dusted hands and a warm, round face, greeted me as if I were a long-lost relative instead of a stranger arriving from another world. "You must be tired," she said, her voice soft but filled with a strength that carried years of work and love. She didn't ask who I was or why I was there, she already knew. My host family had been expecting me, and their welcome felt less like a formality and more like an embrace. Behind her appeared a man with broad shoulders and skin browned by the sun, his shirt rolled up at the sleeves, his palms rough from years of labor. He didn't speak much at first, just smiled, nodded, and carried my bag inside with effortless ease. His presence was steady, like the earth itself, grounding and unshakable. Then came the children. 3 of them. The eldest, a boy of about 14, shyly extended his hand before retreating to the safety of leaning against the doorway. The middle child, a girl with braided hair and curious eyes, immediately bombarded me with questions about the city, about airplanes, about whether I'd ever seen snow. And the youngest, no older than 6, ran straight to me, clutching my leg as though we'd known each other for years. I laughed, surprised at how quickly the walls between us dissolved. In less than 5 minutes, I had gone from stranger to something closer to family. That first evening, they invited me to sit at their dinner table. It was nothing fancy: wooden chairs, some slightly uneven, and a table set with mismatched plates, but it was more beautiful than any restaurant I had ever visited. Bowls of steaming potatoes, fresh bread straight from the oven, roasted vegetables from their own garden, and milk, white, frothy, poured fresh into glass jars just that morning. What struck me most wasn't the food itself, though it tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months, but the way they shared it. Every dish was passed around with laughter, with gentle nudges and playful remarks. The children squabbled lightly over who would get the last piece of bread until their mother tore it in half with a smile. There was no television in the background, no phones on the table, just conversation, stories, and the rhythm of a family that truly lived together. At one point, I caught myself just watching them, a smile tugging at my lips. Something inside me stirred, an ache I hadn't expected. It was the ache of realizing how much I'd been missing. Back in the city, my meals were eaten alone, often in a rush, sometimes ordered through an app and delivered in disposable containers. Here, food wasn't just fuel. It was connection. It was love served on a plate. That night, when I went to bed in the small guest room upstairs, I lay awake for a while, listening to the faint laughter of the family downstairs as they cleaned up together. I thought about how quickly they had accepted me, how easily they had opened their home and hearts. I wasn't just a guest, I was part of their world now, and though I didn't yet realize it, this bond would change everything about the way I saw life. The best vacations aren't about where you go, but about who you meet. And in that farmhouse, I had just met the family that would make this trip unforgettable. The next morning began unlike any I had ever experienced. Instead of the shrill alarm that usually jolted me awake, I was stirred by the soft crow of a rooster outside my window and the gentle hum of morning life. When I stepped outside, the air was cool and fresh, scented with dew and earth. I watched as the farmer, my host, led the cows out to pasture, their steady steps leaving soft impressions in the damp soil. Everything seemed slower, intentional, almost sacred. Later that morning, after helping the children gather eggs from the hen house, I was invited into the kitchen where the woman of the house was already at work. She poured a tall glass of milk and placed it in front of me. At first, I hesitated. Fresh milk? Straight from the cow? My city-trained mind had only known cartons from grocery stores, processed, sealed, and branded. This, white frothy with a faint warmth still clinging to it, felt almost too real. Go on, she urged with a smile. Try it. I lifted the glass, still unsure, and took a slow sip. The taste surprised me. It was richer, smoother, and sweeter than anything I had ever poured into a coffee cup back home. It wasn't just milk, it was life in liquid form, carrying the freshness of grass, the health of the land, the care of the hands that had tended to it. With each sip, something inside me softened, as though a forgotten part of myself was waking up. It was strange how such a simple thing could feel so profound. Drinking that milk reminded me of childhood, of mornings when my grandmother would pour me a glass before school, her hands wrinkled but steady, her eyes watching to make sure I finished it all. It had been years since I allowed myself to pause long enough to remember those moments. Yet here I was, in a stranger's kitchen, reliving memories I thought I had lost forever. As I set the empty glass down, the little girl with the braids giggled. "You liked it, didn't you?" she said, her eyes wide with mischief. I laughed, nodding, and admitted it was the best milk I had ever tasted. The entire family seemed to glow with quiet pride. For them, it wasn't just milk. It was the fruit of their labor, the result of their early mornings, their care for their animals, their connection to the land. And by sharing it with me, they weren't just offering a drink, they were sharing a piece of themselves. From that day on, the milk became a part of my routine. Every morning, a fresh glass awaited me at the table, sometimes paired with warm bread, sometimes with honey drizzled over it. Each time, it felt less like food and more like medicine for my weary spirit. I began to crave not only its taste, but also the ritual, the way it brought us together, the way it slowed down time. Looking back, I realized that first glass was more than nourishment. It was a symbol of what this place represented: authenticity, purity, and love in its simplest form. It was the moment I truly crossed over from being a guest to being part of their story. And as I wiped the milk mustache from my lips, I had no idea how many more moments like this were waiting for me, moments that would fill me with joy, laughter, and a kind of peace I never thought I would find again. The days that followed unfolded in a rhythm so different from the one I had always known. Instead of the relentless buzz of notifications or the urgency of deadlines, my mornings began with soft rays of sunlight slipping through lace curtains and the faint sound of cows lowing in the distance. Breakfast wasn't rushed or eaten on the go, it was an event, a gathering. Fresh bread, jars of homemade jam, eggs that had been gathered only minutes earlier, and, of course, the glass of milk that had now become my favorite part of the day. After breakfast, I joined the family in their daily routines. At first, I thought of it as helping out, but soon I realized it was more than that, it was sharing life with them. The father showed me how to mend a fence, his hands guiding mine as I fumbled with tools I had never held before. The eldest son, shy at first, began teaching me how to care for the cows, how to understand their quiet movements, their eyes that seemed wiser than I could ever comprehend. The little girl never stopped talking, pulling me into games and adventures across the fields, while the youngest followed us everywhere, his laughter ringing like music. What struck me most was the joy that wove itself into every task. Work here wasn't something to escape, it was part of living. There was laughter even in chores, storytelling while peeling vegetables, singing while hanging laundry to dry under the sun. Nothing felt like a burden. Everything, no matter how small, seemed to carry a kind of meaning I had forgotten existed. Afternoons often stretched into hours of wandering. I would walk down dirt paths lined with wildflowers, sometimes with one of the children skipping beside me, sometimes alone with only the sound of wind rustling through the fields. I noticed things I had stopped noticing years ago, the way clouds drifted lazily across the sky, the way bees moved from bloom to bloom, the way the sun painted everything golden just before it slipped behind the hills. These weren't spectacular sights designed to impress tourists, they were simple, everyday miracles, and yet they felt more beautiful than anything I had ever seen. Evenings were my favorite. As the sun dipped low, the family would gather outside. Sometimes we ate supper on the porch, the table lit by lanterns, our voices rising and falling with laughter. Sometimes the children played in the grass while the parents talked quietly, their love for each other evident in every shared glance. I would sit there, watching, feeling like I was part of something so rare, something unpolished, genuine, and deeply human. What surprised me most was how quickly I forgot about my old life. The endless meetings, the unanswered emails, the weight of expectations, it all seemed so far away, like a dream I had woken from. Here, I didn't need to prove myself, didn't need to earn my worth. I was enough simply by being present. Each day blended into the next, not in a dull or repetitive way, but in the most comforting way possible, like verses of a song that you never tire of hearing. And each night, as I lay in bed listening to the soft sounds of the countryside, I found myself smiling for no reason at all. It was in those simple days, filled with laughter, work, and togetherness, that I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years, happiness, not the kind that comes from achievement or possessions, but the kind that quietly fills your heart when life slows down and reminds you what truly matters. One evening, after a long day of gathering hay and playing tag with the children across the meadow, I found myself sitting on the porch with the family. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh earth and wood smoke from the kitchen stove. Above us stretched a sky so wide and clear that it felt almost unreal. Stars scattered across it like diamonds on black velvet, brighter than I had ever seen back in the city, where lights drowned out the night. The children, drowsy from the day's excitement, soon drifted inside, leaving just the parents and me. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was thoughtful, almost sacred. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the constellations, when the mother's voice broke the stillness. "You know," she began softly, "life here hasn't always been easy." I turned toward her, curious. Until now, all I had seen was laughter, warmth, and love. But her words hinted at a deeper truth. She folded her hands in her lap, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. "There was a time when we almost lost this farm. Bad harvests, debts, sickness. We wondered if we could keep going. Many nights we sat right here, asking ourselves if it was worth it." The father nodded, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. His silence spoke of struggles he didn't need to put into words. I could see it in the lines of his face, in the roughness of his hands. This land had demanded everything from him, sweat, strength, and endurance, and yet he had given it without complaint. "What kept you going?" I asked quietly. The mother's smile was small but steady. faith, and love. We promised each other we would hold on no matter how hard it got. And these children, she paused, her voice thickening with emotion, they deserve to grow up knowing what it means to live close to the earth, to be connected to something real. So we stayed. We fought. And we built this life. Her words struck me harder than I expected. In the city, I had often felt like I was running endlessly toward something, success, recognition, wealth, without ever knowing why. Here was a family who had chosen to stay rooted, to weather storms not for glory or gain, but for love, for each other, for the simple truth that life, even when hard, was still worth living when shared with the ones you hold close. The father finally spoke, his voice deep and sure. It's not the land that keeps us, it's the people on it. This farm is nothing without family. Without them, none of this matters. I swallowed hard, blinking against the sudden sting in my eyes. Their honesty, spoken under the wide sky, reached a place in me I had long buried. I realized how lonely I had been, how much I had tried to fill the emptiness inside me with work, possessions, and distractions. What I longed for wasn't more achievements, it was connection. Belonging. A love that grounded me the way this land grounded them. We sat there for a while longer, saying little, just watching the stars burn brightly above us. And in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. It was as though the night itself whispered a truth I had been too busy to hear. Happiness isn't found in noise or in running, but in staying still long enough to cherish what you already have. That night, when I finally went to bed, I carried their secret with me, not just their story of struggle and survival, but the deeper secret of life itself. Under that starlit sky, I had seen what mattered most. And I knew I would never look at my own life the same way again. The days slipped by faster than I wanted them to. What had felt like an eternity of peace suddenly began to run out, as if time itself had quickened its pace once it knew I would soon be leaving. Each sunrise was sharper, each sunset more golden, because I knew they were some of the last I'd see from that porch. And as the date of my departure drew closer, a quiet heaviness began to settle in my chest. The morning of my last day, I woke earlier than usual, not because of the rooster or the light spilling through the window, but because I wanted to remember every detail. The scent of fresh bread baking downstairs, the muffled laughter of the children, the distant sound of cows in the pasture, all of it felt like it was imprinting itself into me, begging me not to forget. Breakfast was quieter than usual. The little girl kept glancing at me, her braid slipping loose from the ribbon she had tied so neatly the night before. The eldest son avoided my eyes, pretending to be more interested in buttering his bread than anything else. Even the youngest, usually bubbling with questions and giggles, sat silently beside me, swinging his legs under the table. The parents tried to keep things light, but the weight of goodbye lingered in the air like a storm cloud. After the meal, the father walked me out to the barn. He handed me a glass of milk, fresh as always, and said simply, "One last for the road." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the sadness he was trying not to show. I held the glass, staring at the creamy surface, and suddenly, it wasn't just milk anymore. It was a symbol of everything I had lived and learned here. Each sip carried memories, laughter over supper, starry nights, the warmth of acceptance, the joy of simplicity. I drank slowly, wishing I could stretch the moment forever. When I set the empty glass down, I couldn't help but feel a lump in my throat. The father clapped me gently on the shoulder and whispered, "Don't forget us." The family gathered by the porch as I loaded my small bag into the car. The mother wrapped me in a hug that felt like sunlight, her hands pressing into my back as if to hold me there a little longer. The children clung to me, one hugging my waist, another grabbing my arm, the youngest wrapping himself around my leg. I bent down, kissed their heads, and promised I'd come back, even though I knew it might not be soon. As the car pulled away, I turned in my seat for one last look. They were all still standing there, waving, the farmhouse behind them glowing in the morning light. My heart ached in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't the ache of leaving a vacation spot, it was the ache of leaving home. Somehow, in just a short time, they had become family, and the thought of returning to the city without them felt like tearing away a part of myself. Tears blurred my vision as the farmhouse disappeared from sight. And though the road ahead was leading me back to the world I thought I belonged to, I knew deep down that a part of me would forever remain in that little village, in that farmhouse, with that family. That goodbye wasn't just the hardest part of the trip, it was the moment I realized the vacation had changed me in ways I could never undo. The city greeted me with its usual noise and chaos, the honking horns, the blur of strangers rushing past, the constant hum of traffic echoing between skyscrapers. It should have felt familiar, like slipping back into a life I had paused for a little while. But instead, everything felt different. The streets I had walked 1,000 times before now seemed colder. The coffee shops I used to frequent tasted rushed and empty compared to the warm breakfasts around that farmhouse table. Even my apartment, once a place of comfort, felt sterile and lifeless when I walked through the door. For days, I caught myself longing for the sounds of the countryside, the rooster's call at dawn, the laughter of children chasing each other through tall grass, the lowing of cows in the distance. I missed the scent of bread baking in the oven, the glow of lanterns during supper, and the simple ritual of that glass of milk each morning. I realized it wasn't just the farm I missed, it was the life I had lived there. A life that had slowed me down, grounded me, and reminded me of what truly mattered. Slowly, I began making changes. Instead of rushing through my mornings, I gave myself time to sit and eat breakfast, even if it was just a piece of toast and tea. I turned off my phone at night and let silence fill my apartment. I started walking more, noticing the little things I had ignored for years, the way sunlight reflected on glass buildings, the way trees swayed in the small park near my office, the sound of birds even amidst the concrete jungle. And every so often, I would buy a simple bottle of milk from the store. It never tasted quite the same. Of course, it lacked the freshness, the purity of the farm, but it reminded me of those days, of the family that had opened their home and hearts to me. Each sip carried a memory, and those memories became anchors, keeping me from slipping back into the frantic pace I once thought was normal. People around me noticed the difference too. Friends said I seemed calmer, lighter. At work, I no longer felt the same crushing pressure. I still did my job, but I didn't let it consume me. I learned to say no, to rest, to value connection over constant productivity. And in quiet moments, when life felt heavy again, I would close my eyes and picture that farmhouse porch, the fields stretching endlessly, the stars above, and the warmth of belonging that had forever imprinted itself on my soul. I may have returned to the city, but I carried that village with me. The lessons, the love, the laughter, all of it lived inside me now. And though life would continue to challenge me, I knew I had discovered something unshakable. Happiness doesn't come from more money, more success, or more possessions. It comes from simplicity, from connection, from slowing down long enough to taste life fully. When people ask about my best vacation, I don't talk about beaches or resorts or expensive destinations. I smile and say it was in a small farmhouse where I drank their milk and it changed me forever. Because that wasn't just a vacation. It was a homecoming. A reminder of who I was and who I wanted to be. 96.